welcome to Nuked Radio. This is episode 11. Today is Monday, March 26th. With me today is Jules and Kurt from Irritate the State. Kurt has a show Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10 to noon and Saturday 1 to 3. Hi, guys.
Good afternoon, Chris.
Hi, Christina. How are you?
Good. I was checking out the earthquake map this morning, and looks like we've got a lot going on. There was 2 7.1s in Chile last night, a few seconds apart, and a 5.1 foreshock. Then overnight, we had a 5.3 in Russia, right at the top of the plate, a 5.2 in Turkey, a 5.2 off Fukushima, then another 4.9 after that. And if you look at the Asia map from yesterday, and I dropped a link into chat for the USGS global feed, you can see that there's a whole line of 4.0s that happened across Asia yesterday. And they're like right on the 33, 34 degree mark. And then we had a couple here in the States too, 3.0 south of Salt Lake City, and a 3.1 in Virginia that's only 8 miles away from Mineral, Virginia, which is where they had the somewhat large earthquake back in August. What were you going to say, Jules?
Oh, I was going to mention that I saw that we had one in Utah and Virginia yesterday.
Yeah, and a lot of little ones right on the California-Nevada border.
Mm-hmm.
And Dutch had put out a bulletin last night saying that there was a 4.0 in Wyoming last night, but USGS took it down. And right before we went on air, we were talking about that seismogram from Mary Lake at Yellowstone the last few days. It looks really strange.
Mm-hmm. Something weird is going on at Yellowstone. I mean, that seismogram literally looked like someone was putting a frequency through it. I mean, I've seen frequencies on paper. That's kind of what they look like, how they arc as waves and then go back down. It looked very odd. It didn't look like a typical seismogram.
No, I've never seen one like that before. I tried to put it in chat, but the link is really slow. It's called isthisthingon.com to go and see all of the Yellowstone links. A couple other things, too. There was a volcano that went off in Puerto Rico during the weekend, and I believe it was Dutch Sense also found out that the Wisconsin booms, they equated that to small earthquakes that are going on, and there's a dormant volcano there as well. There's actually a few of them. They kind of line up pointing towards Lake Superior.
Mm-hmm. Who would have thought that?
Yeah, I know. And there's a lot of mining that goes on there, too. Of course, that's where all the mineral deposits are in those old volcanoes. And then Friday night, there were some plume events caught on radar in New Mexico, also at the site of a dormant volcano.
Yeah, I saw that. And if you look on the map, I mean, that's very close to where you have some calderas down in Southern California, too. So I'm sure that magma is just kind of traveling all underground there.
Well, you got to wonder, too, if that has anything to do with all these sickness and evacuations going on in schools. There were 2 of them from late last week. One was at a middle school in Rhode Island. They've had to evacuate this school 15 times in the last 2 months because kids are getting sick. And this happened over the weekend in Center City, Philadelphia. A number of people had to go to the hospital complaining that they felt like they had been pepper sprayed. And there's a YouTuber called Sheila Aliens. She's actually mapping all these events as they're occurring across the United States. I don't have a link for that particular map, but if you go to her site, you can pull it up. And we've had a lot of these, and you got to wonder what's going on under the ground. There's, these booms, the plume events, dormant volcanoes going off, earthquakes where we're not used to seeing them before.
I have theories, but I don't know. I mean, do you want my opinion?
That's all we have is theories because, when has anything like this ever happened?
Yeah.
Really?
I mean,
what's your theory?
In all seriousness, back when the Large Hadron Collider powered up, I had some thoughts as to what that might do to our magnetic core, things that there hasn't been any research on really large hadron colliders. And I just know, that thing's been going now for a couple years, and it has been a couple years since we've started having lots of anomalous tectonic activity. And that volcano in Puerto Rico, I actually posted that over the weekend on the Orion site, and I had someone send me a private message saying that, I should be really careful about checking my stories because it'll completely damage our credibility. There is no volcano in Puerto Rico. I said, well, Dutch is pretty reliable, but I even went out to the RSOE site, and there is a volcanic eruption on the site. So,
yeah.
But I don't know. That's my thought. Between the Large Hadron Collider and then there are all kinds of strange events going on in our solar system. The newest one now, scientists are saying that Jupiter is melting. I don't know if you saw that.
No.
Yeah. So what does that mean, Venus is slowing down, and they're not sure why. The carbon-14's half-life has changed coming out of the sun. Betelgeuse's pulsar rate has changed, and that's been a constant for as long as we've been paying attention. So, it could very well be something from outside, too, that's causing it. But I guess time will only tell.
Did you see Venus, Jupiter, and the moon were all together last night in the western sky?
I did. I could actually look right out my side window, and they were as clear as day. And I saw a report this morning that Venus is supposed to be visible in the daylight today.
Oh, we went out there around 11. I wanted to show one of my kids, but it was gone already. It had gone down. But if you go out tonight, right after sunset, you can see the three of them together. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, it was. It was very beautiful.
So who knows what these alignments are doing, too. But, there's all kinds of, theories about, gamma rays coming from the galactic center, which we're going to be moving into in December, and how that may be interacting with the Earth's core and possibly heating it up, causing some of these volcanic events and plume events. But I had an interesting conversation with Lauren Murray last night, too. I had called her. She's going to be a guest on Nuked Radio. She was going to be coming on this week, but she's in the middle of a research project. Said she wouldn't be able to come on until next week. And one of the questions that I asked her is if she had considered moving, because she lives in Berkeley, California, with all the fallout that's occurring. And she said right now her most immediate concern is the amount of troop movements that she's seen coming into California. And she said there's just been train after train of convoy vehicles, urban assault vehicles, and it's making her pretty uneasy. I've seen a couple of those videos on YouTube, so I don't know if they're getting ready to mitigate some kind of natural disaster that they're expecting.
Like California having a big earthquake?
California or with these bands going on at the seismographs at Yellowstone, too. It's so strange. I'm going to try to pull up that link in the break and drop it into chat for people to take a look at. But another thing that I asked her, and if you don't know who this lady is, if you've been following Fukushima, you've probably seen some of her videos, and I highly recommend them. She's a meticulous data researcher. She's a geoscientist. She's been following Fukushima. One of the jobs that she had in the past was going to nuke plants after they have a problem and evaluating them from a geological perspective, including the faults, the material, that the ground makeup, whether it's bedrock or shale, how all these things might interact with each other. And she also worked at Livermore Labs in radiation back about 20 years. Has been a whip. So I'll fill you in on the rest of our conversation when we get back. You're listening to Nuked Radio.
You should learn how to say no.
And we're back. I had sent Lauren Murray one of my fallout forecasts last week, and she liked it. But something happened over the weekend, and this is the second time this has happened in the last 2 weeks. There was a lot of moisture that was coming up out of the Gulf of Mexico, and from what I've been noticing, generally when that happens, we don't have much to worry about in terms of fallout. But over the weekend, people were getting really high readings in St. Louis again, 17 times background. After I saw that, I went out and I checked my car, and just off the back window, it was 4 times over background. And Jules, did you say you were getting some spikes?
Yeah, we had a few spikes this weekend. Things are back down now, but up through Friday, it was relatively low, like around 6 to 8 counts per minute. But then we shot up to around 18 to 22 this weekend, and now we're back down again.
Well, even yesterday morning, I was just sitting outside having coffee because it was warm yesterday. Today, it's freezing up here, and we were getting like spikes every 10 minutes or so, and it was, staying high for a minute or two, and it was like 3 to 4 times over background. And it would happen whenever the wind blew. And I mentioned this to her when I was talking to her last night, and I said, this doesn't really make any sense from what I've been seeing over the last few months. And what she said is, don't pay so much attention to the jet stream, pay more attention to the troposphere. And the troposphere is a very turbulent part of our atmosphere that's actually like between us and the jet stream. And it's where all of our storms get generated out of. And she said that a lot of the radiation that's being steamed out of the ground in Fukushima, and she agrees, it's completely ongoing, uncontained. A lot of that is just getting put into the storms and getting dumped over here. And I told her about this, the rad slick too. One of the people on Facebook that I talk to a lot, Zio, and I have him to credit this to for bringing it to my attention, is that rad slick that's off of the coast of Japan, not the debris field, that's something different, but the water that's leaking out from the plants and going into the ocean. It's about halfway between Hawaii and Japan, and that's where a lot of the storms get generated from. That's where they're picking up moisture from. And the jet stream is usually north of there. Then someone else pointed out this morning on the Rad Chick page, Mary, one of the other Rad Chicks, that she was looking at the global infrared over the last 2 days, and the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere is actually mixing, which is unusual. Usually they're like 2 completely like separate bands. And there's high-level jets where the jet stream's real high and will actually sometimes shoot down to Australia, shoot down to the southern hemisphere. In fact, Potterblog had theorized that had happened, and that's why Australia was getting high readings for a while, that some of the radiation was getting way up into the atmosphere and getting brought down there. But if you look at the infrared maps right now, right over Central America, it's totally mixing. Someone commented on my page, is this a pole shift going on, or what's going on here? And this is really unusual to see this. So if you go to the page on Facebook that I've talked about before, Radiation Watch, there's people down in South America and Central America that are posting results there. And they've been getting plume events too. I mean, it just may get to a point where we just have to say you got to avoid all precipitation at all times. Regardless of where it's blowing in from. Maybe there's just so much of it up there. It'd be nice if we had a satellite view that showed where the rads were.
Yeah. Well, I could tell you one thing that I discovered playing with night vision goggles. I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but back in mid-March to April last year, I took a set of night vision goggles outside in the dark to just kind of check them out. And as I looked through the goggles, it looked like it was snowing sparkles. Literally, like everything was just these sparkles falling out of the sky. And I put them away for a little while and took them out again another few nights down the road. And there were still sparkles. And I thought, gee, these night vision goggles must be broken. So I figured I'd do a test. I took them inside, took them into the bathroom, turned the lights off, closed the door, and there were no sparkles.
I've noticed a few times when I've been doing some like night photography, because I like playing around with like the settings on my camera. When I've used the flash by mistake, it's full of dust blowing around. And I've shot stuff at night in the past, I mean, for years, and I've never had like that much showing up on the digital camera. It's the same camera that I've always used. There really is a lot of stuff floating around, whether it's coming from chemtrails or it's coming from Fukushima. You know, who knows? But it is visible. And I see a lot of videos getting posted on YouTube also about orbs, things that people are calling orbs, where I think what they're doing is they're just photographing either radioactive particles or chemtrail particles.
You know, one other thing, too, that you reminded me of, talking about particulates, there was a story that came out the other day, and I'd never seen it quite described like this before, but there was a warning of dangerous, quote-unquote, dangerous pollen levels. Well, since when have they ever called pollen dangerous? But, you know, talking about all the yellow coating on everything. And, I mean, granted, it has been very warm. Everything has popped. I mean, we all have experienced lots of upper respiratory and nose distress over the last week or so. But I saw something where they were postulating that the radiation was actually sticking to the pollen grains. And I don't know if you have looked into any of that, but wasn't there an issue in Chernobyl with the pollen? And then last spring in Japan, they had yellow stuff everywhere, and they're like, oh yeah, don't worry about it, it's pollen. But they thought that maybe it was fallout.
Yeah, Fukushima Diary had posted a few months back that they were anticipating when the pollen let go in their springtime, which is actually a little bit earlier than ours, that it would be a really good time to get out of Tokyo before that, because what happens is when fallout occurs and it's landing on these trees, a lot of the trees that are going to bud, they have like a sticky residue on them, so the particles stick to that, and then the pollen can carry it into the wind again, and it's like you get a second fallout condition occurring. And of course that's already on top of the fact that, from what Arnie Gunderson found in his recent trip to Tokyo, people in Tokyo are basically walking around on radioactive waste. There's so much stuff on the ground. So now it's going to get put back into the air again with all these trees budding. And he had said that this could be a problem in California and the Pacific Northwest also. Of course, last year when Fukushima happened and there was, you know, pollen everywhere, of course they said the same crap they said after Chernobyl. Oh, yeah, it's just pollen, don't worry about it. And there was, you know, movies of, like, kids splashing in puddles, and the stuff was everywhere. And that was fallout. That wasn't even pollen at all. That happened in April, the end of April in Russia. So now that people have Geiger counters, hopefully they're going to be getting out and measuring some of this so they can get a better handle on it. And I encourage anyone that has a Geiger counter that finds readings that are over hazmat level, which I see posted all the time, to contact the EPA and get them out there and, you know, make them deal with this problem. We'll be back in a few. You're listening to Nuked Radio. And we are back with Nuked Radio. Jules had brought up during the break a really great site. She calls it her Doom site, to check everything that's going on in the world right now, biological events, flu breakouts, earthquakes, volcanoes. You can find that at RSOEEDIS. I put a link into chat, so you guys might want to bookmark that site. In Fukushima news, lots of stuff going on over there. There were a few steam events that got recorded on the cameras this weekend, and then, you know, a few earthquakes that shook things up over there. Hydrogen quadrupled in the past 2 weeks in Reactor 2, and that's following a report that the temperature is going up in that reactor again. And this has been kind of the ongoing saga of Reactor 2 for the last few weeks, and TEPCO had said the thermometers were broken. But if the hydrogen is going up, that means that the zirconium cladding of the fuel rods is melting. So there's some melting going on either from fuel that's left inside of the reactor vessel, which they weren't able to visualize when they put a scope down there a couple months ago. It almost seems like, Jules and I had talked about this before, ever since they poked a hole in that reactor to look into it, there's been a lot of weird stuff going on. They've had the temperature problems. If you've seen the video of the endoscope before the camera broke, there's gamma rays shooting all over the place. I mean, it's like looking into a nightmare. And of course, if the hydrogen goes up, then we worry about another explosive event, and that would be really bad. There is, on any news today, a couple of videos to check out. One is at a nuclear safety meeting where the public is allowed to speak, and there's a guy in the audience that asks some very pertinent questions, and the moderator of this organization just sits there motionless and won't even look at him. And then things get kind of out of control. I dropped a link into chat for that video. And what's interesting is all the security guards in the room that end up having to like restrain this guy, they're all wearing masks. There's also a interview from German TV. Armageddon, if spent fuel pool number 4 collapses and melts down, could change the world. Most likely consequence is that reactors 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6 get out of control. Interview with nuclear engineer. I haven't watched this video yet, but you might want to check it out. Jules, do you remember back in August when Harvard's Fogg Museum and the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Museum of Modern Art refused to send works to Japan?
Yes.
Citing radiation concerns. Now the Czech Republic and France said they're not going to send them either. They're worried about their paintings getting contaminated. It's okay if people live there, but we can't send any artwork there.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty smart on their part, but you're absolutely right. I mean, obviously, if it's not safe for artwork, then it's probably not safe for human beings.
And we have people and children and babies living in Fukushima. Chris Busby has said anything within 200 miles is completely contaminated, and that includes Tokyo. So,
you know, one of the things that a few of us were talking about a few nights ago was, I mean, shouldn't we be trying to help resettle these poor people? I mean, the Japanese are highly industrious people. Their country is gone. You know, I mean, a good portion of the country is gone. It will never be safe for them to live there. So shouldn't we, as a free society, be looking to help these people resettle somewhere?
I think there are organizations starting to try to move people out of Fukushima who need financial support since the government isn't doing that. And it was interesting. I saw an article in January that was posted on Any News that some people that had applied for citizenship in Canada to get away from Fukushima were denied visas.
Yeah, I saw that. That's horrible. That's really horrible. And they were saying that, you know, because their government wasn't helping them, they were trying to apply for, what's it called, where you're trying to flee. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I can't think of the word either.
Some sort of special status.
A refugee.
Yes, refugee status. And they turn them down. You know,
I don't know if Canada's the best choice to move to if you're going from Japan. I mean, it's sure the radiation's a lot less, but if you were going to move, I would think probably South America. Yeah. There was also a video of Maggie Gunderson talking about farms in Portland. Do we have time to play that clip, Kurt?
Yeah, we should have just enough time. It's about 3 minutes.
All right.
I've heard reports of radiation showing up on the west coast of the U.S. and Canada in significant amounts, and like mother's milk and other ways from Fukushima. Can you talk about that?
There was a lot of fallout that came to this country. When the explosions happened, there were nanoparticles carried in the upper atmosphere. And as they absorb moisture, they fall out. And as they hit the West Coast, a lot of radiation came down in rain. British Columbia was especially hard hit, Seattle, that whole Washington, Oregon, part of California. Other Southern California, they've had radioactive peaches down there. We know of a organic farm in Portland that he's not selling or producing anything anymore because he tested a lot of radiation on his farm. Hawaii had tainted fruit and milk, and there's a lot of radiation there. And unfortunately, as it came through, you can see the weather pattern. These fluids just came right through. So these nano hot particles, and a person just sitting there and breathing in, an average, let's sit outside, take a walk. It's 10 hot particles a day they're ingesting and sucking, and some of them come back out, but some of them lodge there, and they're in the cells for the lifetime of that person, and most likely will eventually cause a cancer. If they're a runner, or doing sports, biking, any of you bike, it's double the amount, 20 hot particles ingested, or breathed in. So it's very frightening what happened on the West Coast. And as someone just said here in the audience, what about the ocean? The ocean is very contaminated, the Pacific Ocean, and all of that is moving from Japan to the west coast of the U.S. There's a whole island of debris from the tsunami, and much of that debris is radioactive, and that's coming. It's passing first towards Hawaii and then coming up the coast. It's hellacious. I think the most troubling part of it all for me is at the peak when we were finding, we being Arnie and I and the different scientists we work with in independent labs, a lot of them university labs and university monitoring, were finding this terrible influx of hot particles, and the weather patterns were showing it. The U.S. and Canada turned off their monitoring systems and said everything was okay.
One of the things that I mentioned to Lauren when I talked to her last night was the debris field. And she had mentioned there was a fishing vessel that came, that's just off the coast of British Columbia right now. And I said, do you think that this debris is going to be radioactive? And she said, of course it is. It's been raining out particles on top of it for a year. And the particles aren't sinking. They theorized that they would sink to the bottom of the ocean. They're not doing that. And those buckyballs, they float too. Items that are more porous or sticky are probably going to have more contamination. And I wish somebody with a Geiger counter would go out to that boat before the Coast Guard tows it someplace and just take some readings off of it. So, yeah, pretty disturbing for Maggie Gunderson, and she would know. Her and Arnie Gunderson have been on top of this situation since the beginning. In fact, he's one of the people that I go to for information also, and I would highly suggest watching his videos if you haven't done so. We'll be back in a few with Nuked Radio.
There'll be a change in me. My walker will be different, my talk and my name. Nothing about me's gonna be the same. Change my way of living.
Count of three, louder, stay close, my name is hold tight, sing and shout, let's wrap around the crowd and hold tight, shut your eyes, girl, you shut me up,
And we are back. This week, we're going to try to talk about farming and gardening and things to do to grow uncontaminated crops and food. There's a guy that's going to be coming on who is an expert at growing things indoors and overall health solution type stuff. Plus, Jules, I was thinking I should have asked you this off air. I think we should have a Fuku venting day.
To have people just vent their anger,
where people call in and just vent how they feel.
I think that'd
about
be great.
The situation. I was inspired last night. I saw a video on YouTube from Hoodwinked by an Angel. he's put out some great videos, him and Kevin too, where they just let loose on, you know, how they feel about the situation, and I think we need that sometimes.
Yeah, and then what we'll do, everyone use a fake name, and then we'll take the archive and we'll send it to the EPA. We'll post it on Lisa Jackson's Facebook page.
Well, back in the old days, we had something called the Civil Defense or Civil Protection Unit. It was an effort to protect the citizens of a state, generally non-combatants or civilians, from military attack. It uses the principles of emergency operations, prevention, mitigation, preparation, response, emergency evacuation, and recovery. Programs of this sort were initially discussed at least as early as the 1920s and were implemented in many countries, but only became widespread in the USA after the threat of nuclear weapons was realized. Since the end of the Cold War, the Civil Defense Department's been disbanded. Do you know what two agencies arose out of that?
Homeland Security Department? I don't know.
Yep, FEMA and DHS. Threat assessment. Threats to civilian and civilian life include NBC, which stands for Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Warfare. In fact, if you look for masks, the best masks to get are the NBC masks. That's what NBC stands for. And the threat assessment involves studying each threat so that preventative measures can be built into civilian life. That includes threats from conventional explosives, nuclear attack, dirty bomb, biological, and chemical. Preparation consists of building blast shelters, and we still have some of those around. In fact, my old post office has a fallout shelter sign on it. I don't know if you guys remember those.
Yeah, there aren't many left. I was out at one point when Fukushima first happened looking to see where my local fallout shelter was. And it was about 50 miles from here. But in the old days, they used to be in the basements of all the schools. But they're not maintaining them anymore, from what I gather.
Churches as well. I noticed when I was younger, they were in a lot of the churches' basements.
Yeah, and I have a church scoped out here if the spent fuel pool ever collapsed that has a nice big basement that we would probably go to. The more brick, the more layers you can put between you and the outside, the better off you are. They even recommend if you're going to shelter in your own basement that you move all the furniture in the upstairs like over the part of the basement where you're going to be staying.
And pile up all your books and your newspapers and anything you possibly can on top of it.
Yeah, books are actually really good for that, too. Civil defense is also the name of a number of organizations around the world dedicated to protecting civilians from military attacks, as well as to providing rescue services after natural and human-made disasters alike. Make no mistake, Fukushima is a nuclear attack. As the threat of the Cold War eased, a number of such civil defense organizations have been disbanded or mothballed. They called it the Royal Observer Corps in the United Kingdom, while others have changed their focus into providing rescue services after natural disasters, such as FEMA and DHS. If you have concerns about your livestock, especially if you're in the Pacific Northwest, you can get your soil tested. In fact, the woman that you heard speaking earlier, Maggie Gunderson, you can write to them at Fairwinds and ask them for the PDF on taking a soil sample. Because if you try to do this through a lab, first of all, it's going to cost you $600 to $800. And from what I've heard, the results are questionable in terms of accuracy. But the lab that Fairwinds is using, I believe, is from Massachusetts Polytech, and then that data will be incorporated to the soil surveys that we need to put together. So if you write to Fairwinds, I believe it's contact@fairwinds.com is the email address. Ask them for a soil survey form, and it will tell you exactly how to collect it, where to send it, how to mail it in. For protecting livestock, though, there is actually research online in a couple of places. You can go to the Civil Defense Museum, where all of these research projects are archived. And there's projects concerning fallout, and there's projects concerning protecting livestock. How will fallout affect unprotected livestock, that is, animals in fields, pastures, and other open areas? Fallout may be dangerous to cattle, sheep, horses, pigs, and other livestock, as well as to human beings. Radioactive materials in fresh fallout can contaminate the immediate environment and give off rays that can penetrate deep into the body. This is the major source of danger for livestock. Animals can also suffer skin burns if fallout settles in the coat. Skin burns could produce considerable discomfort, but would not endanger the lives of the animals. Animals are about as sensitive to radiation damage as human beings. To survive, animals need the same protection. When livestock must graze on fallout-contaminated pasture, supplemental feeding from non-contaminated forage can materially reduce the daily dose of radioactive materials the animals will eat. Or in the case of Hawaii, they're feeding the animals boron, which helps neutralize whatever they've ingested. When meat and dairy animals eat contaminated feed, some radioactive elements are absorbed into their bodies. Thus, man's food supply of animal products can become contaminated with radioactivity. Again, eat lower on the food chain. Livestock housed in barns and other farm buildings during fallout have a better chance of surviving the effects of radiation than those that are not sheltered. And we didn't shelter our cows at all. Even when the really highly contaminated plumes hit in March, April, and May, they recommend to protect livestock to move them indoors as soon as possible. If you do not have adequate facilities to house all animals, put some of them near farm buildings or in a small dry lot. Under these conditions, the amount of space per animal in a barn should be reduced to the point of overcrowding. The limiting factor is ventilation and not space. The advantage is that the animals tend to shield each other enough that more will survive under crowded conditions than under normal housing. Large protected self-feeders and automatic livestock waters can supply uncontaminated feed and water. Now, they recommend doing this for a few weeks after a nuclear attack. But what do you do when the attack is ongoing? Once fallout occurs, you should not attempt to protect livestock unless local civil defense authorities tell you it will be safe when doing so. Get your dairy cattle under cover first.
Now, I mentioned to you that we have a dairy farmer in the family, and the last time I spoke with him, I asked him if he had received any type of notification about keeping his cows in the barn or watching out for the food, and he knew nothing. Absolutely nothing. And he's got quite a large farm.
Well, you know, a lot of our dairy cattle are in California. And these storms that have been coming over, these plumes that have been coming over from the jet stream and the tropopause and the troposphere, they're raining out over the pastures where the animals are grazing. And if you do know anybody who is in the farm industry, try to send them some of these articles from Any News about feeding the cows boron so they can start talking about this if they're not already. It says fallout particles that settle on hay, silage, or a stack of feed bags will contaminate only the outer parts. You can remove the outer layer of bags and use the inside feed that is unaffected. You will be notified if local civil defense and agricultural authorities who measure concentrations of fallout consider the forage growing in your area is harmful. But of course they're not doing that because they're just pretending everything's okay. However, this advice may come too late in heavily contaminated areas. As a precautionary measure, house the livestock and do not let them graze. If you have to give the cows contaminated feed, if no other feed is available, the milk from these cows should not be used by children. But when the cows are back on clean feed, the amount of radioactive material in their milk will progressively diminish. And then it talks about what can I do with contaminated feed, what to do if the cows die, and what animal food products are safe to market. I'll put a link to this article. It's at ki4u.com. It's a great website where they have lots of fallout videos that were made back in the 60s. Of course, now that we don't have anything like that, and FEMA and DHS are busy doing other things like building camps, this is something that we have to take upon ourselves. So spread this information around. and we'll be talking more about it this week. Thanks for listening today. We'll be back same time tomorrow.